Today, Bill Kristol joins me to take an unfiltered look at the deployment of troops onto the streets of Washington, D.C., President Trump's Alaskan rendezvous with Putin, and the numerous ways basic voting is under attack right now. Plus, a steady creep toward authoritarianism, Pete Hegseth's pastor doesn't think women should vote, and Kim Davis has tied the knot 4 times, but still thinks gay people are ruining the sanctity of marriage. This is Truth in the Barrel, a different kind of whiskey rebellion. Welcome to the show, everyone. We have a special guest today, the legendary Bill Kristol. Bill was a senior official in the Reagan and George H.W. Bush administrations. He founded and edited the conservative magazine, The Weekly Standard, and is now editor-at-large of The Bulwark. So really great to have you with us, Bill, today. Welcome to Truth in the Barrel.
Well, great to be with you, of course, and great to see you again, if not quite in person.
Awesome.
But almost. I think, does this count as seeing someone? I never know what to say, you know. I feel like I'm old enough to remember when we actually saw people in person occasionally, you know, but I guess
think it does. I think it does,
yeah.
and we're moving in this direction, and COVID kind of changed everything.
It did.
And you know, one of the things that I always remember when I did interviews for like TV prior to COVID, you had to go to the studio.
Totally.
Yeah, for me, when I ran for office, I had to drive to Louisville and sit, you know, in the studio at the top of this big building. And then COVID hit, and we all did our interviews from our home. And I do think that's cool because now we can just talk more. You know?
Yeah, I remember at the time I had done TV for quite a long time, and everyone sort of the beginning, the producer types and the execs were, of course, we'll go back to the studio afterwards, so much higher quality, and we control it better, and makeup and this and that. That lasted for like 10 minutes, is my impression. And basically, everyone realized that it's easier for us to sit here and where we're sitting. It's cheaper for them, honestly.
Yeah.
And it turns out viewers, they don't care, which is to their credit, probably don't care quite as much about the, backdrop of the studio or exactly, having a makeup artist to make you look tiny bit better. So anyway.
Totally. And you get to kind of see people where they live to some degree, it's kind of cool. So, well, we have a lot to get through today. And there's a lot going on in our country. I want to start out with the deployment of the National Guard in Washington, D.C., because that is happening right now. And, 30 years ago, House Republicans, you will probably remember, demanded answers from then President Bill Clinton about the siege in Waco, Texas. And they saw the use of force by the FBI as excessive and an example of sort of big government run amok. And now we have the FBI and the National Guard on the streets of Washington, D.C. You saw it in L.A. just a month or two ago. We now have supposedly 800 troops being deployed in the next 30 days, perhaps even longer, to fight crime. And my first question to you is, do you think House Republicans will once again speak out about big government in this case?
I take it that's a rhetorical question. Yeah. Somehow I don't think they'll be objecting. I don't see any of them objecting yet to this thing, which, as you say, not just the Waco incident, which was obviously tragic in many ways, but more broadly, it's such a staple of conservative talking points, federalism, state and local control. Mm-hmm. The last thing we need is a federal government that, can deploy military, very careful with posse comitatus. Military should be used abroad. And so I agree with these conservative talking points from the old days, which were also liberal talking points mostly. I remember how hesitant President George H.W. Bush was in 92 to send the Guard into L.A. in the middle of really massive riots. 50 people had been killed. The governor wanted them in, and it was genuinely to help the LAPD in a situation that looked like it could really, really spin out of control. It had spun out of control some already. And they were there, and they helped out, and they left. And no one thought this was George H.W. Bush taking over the governance of the Los Angeles police force or the state of California and so forth. I mean, think what a contrast, right? And even that was done cautiously and reluctantly by the Bush administration. I remember the internal discussions, because you don't want to set that precedent. And it wasn't a precedent. So no one did it for the next 30 years, basically, because everyone understood that thank God we didn't. That was a pretty unusual situation. And here we are, no emergency, crime rates are going down. But even if they weren't, incidentally, there's no crime. It's not whatever. It's not Waco. It's not L.A. It's just a city, And he has a little bit of a legal advantage in D.C. because there's no state government. Obviously, it's a kind of unusual legal situation. A little more ability to deploy the Guard here than he would normally, and I guess to take over the police department. But it's very alarming. I think too much of the coverage, honestly. I'm very curious to know what you think about this, since you know the world of the Guard and the military much more intimately than I do. But people are a little too focused on what they're doing, and they're in the streets, and they aren't being nice to the people in D.C. And there's some people yelling at them. I mean, that's all interesting, obviously, and newsworthy. But what's the precedent that is being set between L.A. and D.C. is intentional. I mean, that's the main point. This isn't just like, oh, he's doing these things randomly because he's kind of doesn't understand. And look what's happened. They planned to do this. This is the design. First, you normalize the use of the Guard. Then in LA, you normalize the use of the active duty military, some of the Marines. In DC, you normalize the use of the Guard. But above all, you normalize the use of taking control of the local police department. DC's law says the congressional law that covers DC says 30 days. But Trump says, well, I can extend that, get another authorization for another 30. And actually, if Congress doesn't do it, I have this emergency power, this, I guess, Article 2 emergency power for everything. So they are really laying the predicate for the president, and then the ICE expansion. The president of the United States having a personal ability to deploy federal law enforcement at his will and whim, really, wherever he wants. He mentioned about other cities too. So I think it's very ominous, honestly. What do you think?
I think it's super scary. So first of all, we know that the Posse Comitatus Act is there for a reason. And I think what we're finding right now is we've had these laws in this country, but when you have a president like Trump and you have a Republican Party that is so beholden to him, meaning the congressional Republicans unwilling to stand up to him, you find that a lot of our country in the past has been run by these norms. And these norms can be, picked at, and sort of like 1,000 cuts. And, they're going to find a way around this. Well, around the Posse Comitatus, let's just declare an emergency. Well, what for? Is there an emergency? Well, sure, crime. Yeah, crime is real. It's real. Like, we should all be worried about that and do something about it. But like the use of the military, as you say, the normalized use of the military in American streets, that's just not something that we should be doing. And it's also really bad for the military. It's not just about what are they doing and they're not trained for this. And that is true. It's also the fact that when you deploy troops, first, it costs a lot of money. Okay, great. But the National Guard, these are part-time warriors. You're taking them from their jobs. You're taking them from their jobs in, whatever it is that they do. And you're deploying them to do what? Who knows? But certainly as a display of power. This is about power and not crime. And you're taking them away from their families, in some cases, away from leave or liberty. Sometimes a lot of these guys and women they're going to school, so you're taking them out of school. And there's really the reasoning behind it is sort of dubious here. And so I feel like it's a great concern. And here's the other thing about crime. It is really important to tackle crime. There's no doubt. But if the Republicans and Trump were so serious about tackling crime in Washington, D.C., why did they essentially defund the police there? When this latest bill that passed, they cut resources for the DC police. I think about $67 million that would have been cut from the police budget. And that hasn't been fixed. Like we're not talking about that. That's, to me, like, hey, if you want to fight crime, you need to give the local police forces the ability to do that.
the thing is just a pretext, and people are being a little too, not you, but others, too credulous about it. Well, let's have a discussion of crime. And maybe it's down 25%, but it went up a lot in 2022. So it's not down quite as slow as other cities are, and et cetera. It's all ludicrous. Donald Trump doesn't care about crime in Washington, D.C. What is he? Has that been like? Does he have a lot of legislative proposals in the first 6 months to deal with the emergency? And if there's an emergency in the country, right, you have proposals to deal with it. Then maybe at the extreme case, you have to do something unilaterally. Even that's questionable. But he did nothing, as you say. The bill he was so proud of cut funds for law enforcement actually across the country, but also in D.C. And they cut funds for the government in D.C. It's one reason of the mayor's being so cautious, honestly, in dealing with Trump. She's already losing federal support. And D.C., again, is in a unique situation with being at the federal city. So he's not serious about it. It's a pretext. It's a pretext for deploying the troops. And it's very bad for the troops. I couldn't agree with that more. I mean, one reason the military has such high standing in the U.S. is we've been very careful to keep it out of. It's not like a third world country where the dictator snaps his fingers and the military is suddenly cracking down on protesters. And then the military is part of the oppressive government, and then people don't like it. And there's splits in the military, and the colonels rebel against the generals or whatever, right? I mean, we have, thank God, been spared that almost entirely in our history. And I do think those headlines, authoritarian inclined president calls in federal troops on a pretext and takes over the police force in the nation's capital. If we saw that headline from...
Sounds like Sudan.
Yeah, or Latin America, or parts of Central and Eastern Europe in less happy times, or Bangkok or someplace, right? I mean, that's not... If we saw it elsewhere, we'd think, oof, that's bad. What's going on there? That could really be a slide towards authoritarianism, towards dictatorship. And we need to think of it that way here, honestly.
Because it's not just LA and DC. I mean, apparently there's plans to have this quick reaction force. So the military, what that means is the military is constantly on call, ready to go. And it's not just like, hey, I'm on call by my cell phone. It's like, no kidding, ready to go. You're on the base with your stuff, ready to go when you're sort of on call and at some of these orders.
And then
anywhere in the country.
And the memo that was leaked was, anywhere in the country. And if there are protests or disturbances, well, what does that mean, right? I mean, so again, Trump's trying to really push the Overton window, however you want to say it, to kind of normalize this. And I worry that he's, it's only 7 months in, the degree to which this and many, many other areas, I mean, the degree to which he's doing things that would have been red lines. I think we all discussed this before he was in different forums, before he was inaugurated. You and I discussed it, I think, also personally. And, what would be the red lines that would show he's really going down an authoritarian path? Use of the military domestically. This would be in everyone's top 5, right, of things.
Sure.
And here we are.
Yeah, here we are. And the other thing that's really important to point out is, remember in the first term, he tried to do some of this stuff.
Right.
And he was stopped. He was stopped by the then Secretary of Defense, first Jim Mattis, then Mark Esper, who then, after, Donald Trump left office, went to the public and said, this man tried to use the military in inappropriate ways, and I stopped him. And, now we have a Secretary of Defense who's not going to stop him. And, the other thing about this Trump and Republicans and the sort of anti-crime thing, we all have to remember, if they cared so much about that, why did they pardon 1,300 or 1,200 criminals who attacked the Capitol on January 6th?
In D.C. I mean, it's not an accident that it's the capital. I mean, it's partly because I think D.C. is unpopular in the country. It's been a black majority city, not actually quite anymore, but for a long time. So some of the country regarded it as kind of a different kind of place, and so forth. And it's been demonized by Republicans for an awful long time too. So they think that's one reason they chose D.C. The other reason is it's actually kind of important, like what happens in the streets of D.C., as we saw on January 6th. And having that ability to control the police force here and all the attendant federal forces, and there are a million of them, park police and people who guard the museums and people who guard the embassies, they're just different parts of Secret Service. Obviously, this is lots of different overlapping jurisdictions here. The ability that Trump has now kind of normalized, as I say, to exert control over all of them, is potentially pretty dangerous for our country, honestly. I mean, really dangerous, not just in sort of unpleasant or contrary to what we're used to.
Yeah, I get this question a lot from neighbors and just folks that are watching all of this stuff unfold, first in LA and then now in DC. And one of the questions I get is there anything we can do about this? And so that's tough. What do you think?
No, it's tough. And the LA thing, I mean, just since you mentioned, it's just the ICE. I mean, the tripling of the funding for ICE and the tripling of its size, I guess, and the recruiting that they're doing. I mean, that is not good. DHS, whatever, the military has a lot of still, even if no Mattis, no Esper, et cetera, there's still internal constraints in the military that probably slow down the ability to use the military in a really pernicious way. Honestly, I think it'd be harder. We'll see how much damage Hegseth can do over 1, 2, 3 years. But still, I feel that's harder. It's a harder nut for them to crack. Yeah. DHS, they're just recruiting people for ICE, God knows, off the streets, basically, with huge signing bonuses. They're waiving all the normal training, all the normal criteria, it seems like, almost for, having a college degree and things like that. And who knows who's signing up for that, and who knows if they're being vetted in any serious way. And so then he's got kind of his own little police force. And then, of course, what they're doing is horrible, seizing people who are lining up to go to work and stuff. So anyway, to answer your question, but I just, the ICE thing has also been, it's been seen from the point of view of, immigration policy. It is very important in that respect too, and that's bad. But I think seeing it as also a threat to our democracy, honestly, to the rule of law is important.
I do too. And one of the things that's really struck me is, with regards to ICE, is this group of masked men running around with the protection of and the backing of the federal government. It's just with no patches, no identifying features. Those of us in the military we were in the streets of Baghdad. We weren't masked. You go and you're wearing the uniform of the United States of America. It's labeled. I feel like we're in a different place, in a place that I have never seen in this country ever. And it is scary.
Yeah, so the mask thing, I'm really, it freaks me. I mean, it did freak me out. And I complained about it on TV and something, and I was, oh no, they're having they're doxxed, they're treated badly online. People post their names, maybe their addresses if that's public. And people, in my opinion, probably shouldn't do that. Not probably, they shouldn't do that. And it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate if it happens to judges, which it has happened, and it's led to no violence. But that's not an excuse. I mean, I grew up in New York City at a time of rising crime, really high crime. The New York Police Department, they drove around, they dealt with very tough criminals. They were in patrol cars, they had their name badge, they didn't wear masks. Obviously, if you're in some special SWAT type situation with gang leaders, maybe you wear, you disguise your identity, but not normally. To normalize that too is very dangerous. And it does lead to all kinds of practical problems, like how do we know who these people are? And are they really ICE agent, ICE? And are they just buddies of ICE people who kind of put on the mask and came along for the ride? Or are they the Fox News reporter they've gotten along to make it a publicity stunt, for Kristi Noem and all that? I mean, so it's, the whole thing is distressing. I mean, I think people do need to be apprised of their rights. People should feel I think honestly, that just standing there and taking the photos has had some deterrent effect, using the cell phones and stuff. I mean, I feel like that people don't, who knows what would happen if this were really, not on camera, so to speak.
Sort of like organic body cameras. But, I also feel like this has a potential to create unrest in our country too. You're like, he's stoking, trying to create unrest, trying to get those images. Which is also, to me as an American, just sad to see that happening. But hey, while President Trump is running the risk of creating this unrest in D.C., he apparently thinks he can bring peace to Ukraine by meeting face-to-face with Vladimir Putin in Alaska. And so this is happening very soon. Look, I've always said I think it's important that Trump have an interest in trying to work for peace. I mean, we all want this, right? We all want this war in Ukraine to end. And I was actually, saddened when earlier this year, Trump didn't seem to care about peace. You remember when he sort of threw up his hands and said, I'm out, let these guys, they're just going to have to fight it out. Now he cares about it again. But I'm doubtful that this meeting will do anything. I think just having a meeting doesn't mean, as Fiona Hill has said, doesn't mean anything's going to come from it. And I fear that bringing Vladimir Putin, who's a war criminal, to the United States and giving him a face-to-face meeting is really just giving him a sort of a political win. What are your thoughts?
I think it's very much the case. I mean, he can't go anywhere. He hasn't been in Europe for meetings since the war began because he is an outcast, and he should be an outcast. It's a brutal invasion. Obviously, it's totally launched by him, unprovoked, and he's continued it, and it's been conducted brutally, and the unbelievable death and destruction in Ukraine. And he has correctly been made a pariah. Now, some nations deal with him, obviously, and maybe we should be a little tougher and try to get some of them to deal with him less. But most of our allies don't. Almost all of our allies don't. And suddenly Trump has him to the U.S. I mean, that is terrible. It's just destroy. I mean, now he's not an outcast. He's meeting with the president of the United States. Yeah. And without Zelensky there, bargaining over Ukraine's future, I imagine nothing much will come of it. But on the other hand, I don't think it strengthens. It will. Luckily, the Ukrainians are very tough, but it would otherwise demoralize them. It has a real Munich feel to it, where Chamberlain and Hitler negotiated without the Czechs being present. And I think if Putin suckers Trump into some ridiculous deal over, Zelensky will object and I think won't go along, and Europe maybe will stick with Zelensky, but you're putting our allies and our friends and the people who are fighting in Ukraine for their freedom in a very difficult place. So I'm not happy. And the meeting is a bad idea. I have no confidence. If Trump was some kind of genius, geopolitical negotiator, was really going to pressure Putin. He keeps talking about pressuring Putin. He's done almost nothing. Incidentally, this bill that has 85 co-sponsors in the Senate still hasn't come up for a vote to toughen sanctions, let alone actually sending arms to Ukraine, which he's done a tiny bit of, but no actual appropriation. So right. I'm worried about this meeting.
Yeah, Trump's threatened to impose tougher sanctions on Russia almost like every other week, it seems. And then he's like, well, I'm going to do it in 30 days. And there's a deadline. And all of that goes away. And now he's just handed Vladimir Putin this high profile face-to-face meeting in the United States. And this isn't the first time, right? I mean, Donald Trump likes to hand bad actors the international stage, for these high-profile meetings. I mean, remember Kim Jong-un in the first administration? But I also think that it's just really bad. I feel like, again, you say you want peace, but you're not doing anything that's serious. Policy or talk in terms of ending the conflict. I mean, what are some of the things that he could do? As you said, more military aid, more sanctions, pressuring the European banks to seize Russian assets is another one that a lot of people talk about. You could even talk about threatening to create a security agreement with Ukraine. I mean, I don't see. If you're Vladimir Putin, I don't see Trump coming with anything that I'm remotely afraid of, this meeting.
Totally agree. And it's bad. He's got, he doesn't have serious people advising him on it. Not that he wants them to advise him, I suppose, but his Witkoff goes over it. I mean, a professional diplomat I was talking to earlier this week, and this is not the most important point, but it's an interesting point. Witkoff goes to these meetings. I mean, doesn't know anything about Russia or Ukraine or anything like that. He's a real estate guy from New York, I guess, but they think he's good at making deals. He goes to see Putin in the Kremlin, brings no translator, no U.S. translator, no one from the embassy, no Russia expert, no one who knows anything about the details of where Donetsk is or where, these different parts of Ukraine are and their history in Crimea. And he sits there, Putin, and he talked for 3 hours. He comes out with a totally garbled, apparently, the understanding of what Putin said. Who knows? We don't know what Putin said. You know why? Because we don't have anyone there taking notes. You've been in international meetings as both when you were in the military and subsequently, right, as a civilian. And I mean, there's people like memorializing what's said, so we have a record, so you can go back home and say, well, is this acceptable? Is this a bad idea? What's the counter proposal to this? None of that. So it's both amateurish and clownish, but also very dangerous, obviously.
It is dangerous, and not even the JV. It's like not even the freshman team. We're still back in the the middle school area. And Witkoff, I mean, and this is standard for Trump's cabinet. No qualification, no experience in diplomacy. The guy he's a real estate guy, so apparently he knows how to negotiate. I mean, we all know that's just total BS. And also, I would say, where has he succeeded? There's still a war in Gaza. There's still a war in Ukraine. There hasn't been any success in any of that. But here's the other thing. You can't, in my mind, talk about Ukraine and peace in Ukraine without Ukraine at the table.
Right.
It's a fundamental thing about negotiating for peace in a conflict in which the country that was invaded is not at the table. And Donald Trump seems to want to push land swap as the, hey, we're gonna give Putin a little bit of land, and then this thing's gonna end. And I just want to hear what your take is on that. I feel like, look, I want the war to end, but I just feel like that is a really bad thing to do. We're rewarding Putin for invading if we do that.
No, terrible. And I just lays the predicate for him renewing the invasion in a year or two, or going after other countries. And no, I totally agree. And it's just, again, shows, I mean, I think it's not even that Trump doesn't know how to do this kind of thing. He doesn't care. I mean, he doesn't like Ukraine. He sort of admires Putin because he's a tough guy. He's said that many times, and he likes the dictators. So maybe, I assume he wants peace. I don't know. I hope he wants peace. Decent human being would, but he's not serious about either peace in Ukraine or about the implications beyond Ukraine. And they're the Europeans. I mean, we are living in an era, not what I expected to see after being a Republican and the Reagan Bush type of Republican, McCain type Republican. The Europeans are much more hard-headed than we are. The Europeans who are not nearby and who really see what's going on are like, you can't do this. You've got to be careful not to reward Putin. You got to be careful to include Zelensky. You can't undercut our actual allies fighting for freedom and for their national well-being. But it's us who is undercutting. I mean, isn't that terrible? The U.S. is the weakest link.
We are. Well, I mean, I'm somebody that I'd love to see this war end. I just don't think it's going to happen in Alaska. Have you ever been to Alaska, by the way?
Yeah, sure. Several times.
Yeah.
When I was in government, when I was Vice President Quayle's chief of staff, we used to stop there all the time on the trips to Asia because our old Air Force Two couldn't make it all the way to Tokyo, without refueling at Elmendorf, I guess.
Elmendorf, yeah. Well, the summertime in Alaska, you don't really have any darkness up that high. So I did a few weeks, a month or so in Alaska in the summertime in June, doing an exercise called Red Flag North or something. I can't remember what it was called. Cold Flag. I don't know. Anyway, the sun never set. like it went down to the horizon and then back up again. And it really does some weird things to your mind at that point. But all right, well, we'll see what happens there. One of the worst things about, and I do hear this a lot from neighbors and friends here in Kentucky, is that people feel overwhelmed by the news. There's so much going on, so many attacks on our democracy that regular people sort of want to just check out. And I think one of the worst things about being overwhelmed is that we can't sort of pay attention to all of it. And maybe we're not paying attention to some of the stuff that's happening behind the scenes that is really, really bad. Because there's so much right in front of us that's really bad. But the Republicans right now are trying and often succeeding to go after voting rights and voting in America. It's under attack. It rarely makes the front page of the news. And they're doing this all in the name of like election security or preventing voter fraud, which, by the way, no one's ever found any significant voter fraud. But I just want to run down some of the things that the Republicans are doing right now and kind of get your take on what you feel is really important to watch out for. First thing they're doing is gutting, or have already done, is gutting CISA, which is the component of the Department of Homeland Security that is responsible for protecting elections, the physical security of our election infrastructure against foreign entities and that sort of thing. Another thing they're doing is an executive order to mandate that voters show a passport and prove citizenship when they vote. And there's a lot of folks that have said that 21 million citizens do not have a birth certificate, and so that's going to make it hard for them to vote. They're making states provide voter rolls to DOJ, to the federal government. All right. That seems bad to me. They're attempting to withdraw federal approval from voting machines. And so now there's just one voting machine system that complies with the new standards. And that's going to cost lots and lots of money to fix and make states want to do paper ballots, hand ballots, which contain tons of errors. There's the major gerrymandering efforts that we've all been talking about, more kind of on the front pages of the news. And then most worrisome to me is the use of the Department of Justice to target election officials who were telling the truth, Bill, in the 2020 election, who were just simply doing their jobs. The administration has repeatedly threatened to prosecute these individuals. And I just think that's just really, really scary. So I want to get your thoughts on all of this and what you think is most important.
No, I think it's great that you put it together that way, because one tends to see them individually. Of course, this thing is in the news this day and something else is in the news, 4 days later and stuff. And it's part of a broader attempt to tilt the playing field. I mean, let's just be honest. And the overwhelming thing you mentioned at the beginning is also part of a broader attempt to overwhelm us, with so much stuff that we can't really react, and that you sort of let a lot of it go by. But in this case, it does fit together. Of course, what they want. Election. There will be elections in 2026 and 2028. I believe he's not going to cancel them, but they would like as much as possible to help Republicans. And we're seeing that totally transparently in Texas, obviously, with where the norm has been, and the law really following the constitutional mandate for the 10-year census, that, you redistrict once every 10 years. That's a political process. There's gerrymandering on both sides, no question. But then you don't get to change it every midway through if you think you're going to lose the House. And it's once or twice there have been attempts to done a little of this in the past, often provoked by court fights, but not this kind of just blatant, flat out. And they say it incidentally. The top Texas officials don't say we're doing this because there are inequities or there's problems or there's this. They're doing it because they want to get more Republican seats. And then they're forcing the Democrats to react by saying we're going to try to get more Democratic seats, and we're in not a good situation. I think Democrats have to react, but and I don't know ultimately how many seats this moves, but we're unleashing things here that we're now going to play out in a very bad way. Various norms that have constrained politicians' ability to monkey with the electoral system, that have allowed, therefore, the voters to throw out politicians in midterm elections many times and throw out the majority party. They're trying to stop that. It does suggest they're nervous about 2026, which is good. Yeah. And that he is losing some popular support. But again, the public, he can lose popular support, but if they can monkey with the system and the right to vote and the ability, making it easy or not easy to vote, mail votes, and so forth, MAIL, mail votes, and though they seem to want to also deny female votes, that's a separate agenda.
We'll talk about that later.
That's a separate agenda item of Pete Hegseth, I guess. I mean, it is. No, I'm very worried, and I think it's not only just to look it back. I think the deployment of the police, of the troops, and taking over the police force is very much part of that. Riots and I don't know, I'm making this up. You're in Kentucky. I mean, riots in whatever, Louisville, some city in Kentucky, maybe one of the few places that has a Democratic member of Congress, have to send in the guard and have to send in the troops, take over the police. They have a very strict, very strict now requirements for, as you say, for voting and birth certificates, things that none of us carries around really, and not all of us know where ours are, sorry, can't vote. Maybe a little bit of discriminatory enforcement of some of these things, I'm thinking, in some areas. And suddenly, you get a different vote in some of these states and localities.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't take A ton. I mean, one or 2 points could be the difference in some of these districts and sort of. So it's very scary. What do you think of Governor Gavin Newsom in California? Sort of his maybe preemptive. Hey, Texas, are you going to do this? I'm gonna retaliate.
I mean,
on the gerrymandering.
I think his instinct is right that you shouldn't let them get away with it. I mean, practically speaking, California being a sort of good government-ish state and having been governed by Democrats who believe in redistricting panels, commissions that are not partisan, California has a law that establishes these commissions and it makes it, you can't just overturn it. So he would have to have a referendum to allow for redistricting. Texas has no such law, and Abbott just calls the legislature in, and we'll see if they get away with doing it, but they can get away with doing it. I'm not so sure, but citizens they kind of like in California, the nonpartisan redistricting. I'm not so sure it's that easy for Newsom to pass that referendum. So the Democrats, because they actually sort of believe that we should limit gerrymandering somewhat, have disadvantaged themselves. I'm not criticizing them. I think they were acting honorably. I just think it's a little tough for Newsom to make up the difference. Tougher for him to do in California than it was for Abbott in Texas.
Yeah, I feel like Democrats have played by the rules for so long. It's hard. It's hard for Democrats to flip a switch and be like, okay, we're just going to go for pure power here and go after it. And that puts Democrats at a disadvantage. Yeah. Well, there's a lot going on. I mean, it's a lot to watch out for. And I do feel like the voting piece is we're not paying attention to it as much as we should, because that is a big way to gain power and disenfranchise millions of Americans. I want to stop right now just to give a quick plug for our upcoming live show. Tuesday, August 19th from 7:30 to 8:30 p.m. Denver and I will be there live with special guest JoJo from Jurors. That's JoJo Carducci. We are really excited. That's Tuesday, August 19th. 7:30 to 8:30 p.m. Eastern Time. Can't wait. Now it's time for some quick shots. We're going to go through a few things to get your take on this stuff that's happening, Bill. Pete Hegseth, pastor, said women shouldn't be allowed to vote. Okay, and his pastor's name is Doug Wilson. He went, I guess he had a PBS, an amazing interview, and it has one quote that stood out to me, isn't about voting, but it's about women serving in the military. And he said, quote, "I think we ought to find out the name of the person who suggested that we put women on those submarines and have that man committed." He said, it's like having a playpen that you put 50 cats in and then drop catnip in the middle of it. Whatever happens is going to be ugly. And if you think it's going to advance the cause of women and make sailors start treating women less like objects, then you haven't been around the block very many times. I say that because this guy was also in the Navy a long time ago. He didn't serve with a whole lot of women. And he's very clearly a far right, sexist, pastor. And the fact that we have a Secretary of Defense who is not only listening to this guy, but like retweeting him, to me is not only outrageous, but it is a slap in the face to the thousands of women who serve in the military and frankly serve in capacities that this guy, this pastor, couldn't even dream of and couldn't do himself. So I'll just leave it at that and give me your take.
Well, I think you made a key point, which is I was talking about Wilson with someone, and he said, well, I mean, he's sort of Hegseth's pastor, or Hegseth goes to a church that's affiliated with the group of churches that Wilson leads or something. But, we can't hold Hegseth responsible. Hegseth chose to retweet this interview in which these statements that you're reading were made. So, I mean, I think it's perfectly fair to say, why is he retweeting it unless if he doesn't agree with it and admire Wilson? So I think that's the one point. And the second point, I defer to you totally on how many problems there are in the military with, sexual abuse of different kinds and so forth. There clearly have been some. It took a while to work things out, I think. But I think the military's been pretty serious about working it out. And I kind of feel like my sense is from our son served and stuff that, it's as institutions in America go, the military is in decent shape in this respect. It has been taken seriously its obligations to obviously provide a decent work environment and human environment for everyone who signs up and who's in there. Maybe Doug Wilson should look a little closer to home at some other institutions he's pretty close to and see how women are being treated in sadly and very unfortunately in some churches that he's quite close to and so forth, right? That seems to be the place where the scandals are happening, not on submarines these days. So, and again, it's not as if, it's sort of like with Trump, though. It's not like he sincerely is studied or cares about, if I can honestly say, women on submarines, right? He doesn't. It's just a talking point for him to be against everything, I don't know, any kind of equality of treatment for women, really, right?
Well, and let me just make the point, because I know some women who have been on submarines and serving on submarines. The folks that go on submarines and sailors, they're really good. They're really smart. You don't get the subs. You really have to score high. The officers that go through the training for submarines, that's some of the toughest training in the entire Navy, to go through nuclear power school. We need talent in those areas. And when we didn't have subs open for women, we had a hard time recruiting the talent. And I know this because I was at the Naval Academy as an instructor later on in my career, then on the Board of Visitors under Joe Biden. And I got to tell you that when we opened subs to women, not only did the women perform just as well, if not better, than many men, but we started meeting our recruiting needs, because we opened up that talent pool to 50. Women were 30% of the Naval Academy at that point. The other 30% of officers that are graduating, and that's huge when you're talking about taking the right people, the smart people to go into that field. I mean, and I always kind of joke around with sub folks about that, because I never wanted to be on a sub myself. There's no windows. I don't typically like that, but you got to have a special person to do it, and they got to be smart. And the women that are doing it are fantastic, and the professionalism of our submarine force is just amazing. And again, it's so unfortunate to me that we have a Secretary of Defense that would retweet this stuff, because you're literally you're slapping the face of the people that are working for you, the professional people that are working under you. So that's all I'll say on that.
And he fired, of course, he fired the competent, apparently, very competent woman who was CNO, right? I guess,
right. Yeah. The chief of naval, as well as lots of other women, and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who happened to be a person of color. So there's a lot going on there with Pete Hegseth. And in my mind, it's a lot of insecurity, frankly. But let's move on. Kim Davis, the former Kentucky County clerk, who in 2015 refused to issue marriage licenses to same-sex couples due to her religious beliefs, she is back in the news. She filed an appeal, which has gone up to the Supreme Court to overturn the Obergefell versus Hodges. That's what legalized gay marriage around the country, legalized same-sex marriages. She has filed this to overturn it. And, to me, I always thought this issue was kind of done in America, but here we are. We have a Supreme Court that has overturned Roe, which I also thought was kind of a done issue at one point in terms of the legal right. And now I'm kind of worried. Are you?
I mean, I'm not worried in the narrow sense that I don't think the court's going to take the case. And I think I think they're very, very unlikely to strike down same-sex marriage after 10 years. But I guess I'm amazed by is the extremism on the right, and that it's come back. It's stronger than I expected. It's more radical, more extreme than I expected. Obviously, I was a Republican, and we always had people on our flanks who were a little crazy about different issues. We fought them sometimes, Pat Buchanan and others. I was certainly pleased when he left the Republican Party in 1999. But others we kind of accommodated, probably maybe it was a mistake, but whatever, they were part of the coalition. But to be fair, I think Bush, Romney, McCain kept them in check, if you know what I mean, and mostly. And what's striking is I don't think this woman represents that many people, but I haven't heard a whole lot of Republicans saying, well, that's out of the question. That's ridiculous. That's a bad idea. I don't associate myself with that. I don't know. You're there. You're closer than I am. Are the senators from Kentucky all saying?
Oh, they're not saying anything. Are you
members
kidding
of
me?
Congress? I mean, members of the governor.
They're not going to stay. Well, the governor might say something, but certainly the Republicans in the state aren't going to say anything.
Democratic governor, yeah. But the Republicans aren't.
Yeah, our governor may. I feel like, and here's the other thing that's interesting about Kim Davis. She is the Kentuckian bringing this case. She has been married, Bill, 4 times. 4 times. And she is like saying, I'm going to bring a case about the sanctity of marriage. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. Yeah. I don't know. All right. So recently, the Smithsonian got a letter from the White House saying that the White House is now doing, I guess, an investigation where they want all of Smithsonian exhibitions to reflect Trump's views on American history. And this also is one of these things that's like maybe not the front page news, but it seems pretty, I don't know, Stalin-esque to me. What are your thoughts?
No, totally. We have a good piece on this in the Bulwark this morning by a historian. I mean, it'd be one thing, if he looked at the people who were governing the Smithsonian, both the staff, but also the boards of, advisors. You can put on a couple of conservative historians if you think it's got a little unbalanced in the presentation. But a letter that is supposed to, so restore some balance. I don't know incidentally that I live here in D.C. or outside D.C. I haven't heard a lot of complaints about Smithsonian exhibits, but it's conceivable. But reflect Trump's view of history. What the hell is that about? Who cares what his view of? First of all, does Donald Trump have a view of history? No, he has a view that he doesn't like it when people talk about certain topics that are from the past or the present that discomfort him, as he wants a kind of, as you say, so Stalinist, everything was always been great until the woke people got involved, and then it got really bad. And so you can't have anything divisive. That's what the letter says. And then it's all supposed to be about Americanism. So it's kind of creepy in that way. But the idea that they're supposed to listen to Trump, that's not, the president has no right to tell, or shouldn't. In a healthy liberal democracy, the president would be president and he'd do whatever he does. And, these other organizations would be semi-autonomous, and they would report, obviously they get appropriated funds, and they would report up to different administrators and so forth. But the president would not directly say that I want you to reflect my view of history. And the Kennedy Center thing is the same, and similar in the sense that it's, of course, that's just more comical and ridiculous. And Trump's picking Kennedy Center honorees. Who cares, I guess? And he's deciding what shows will be put on there. He likes 80s musicals. That's very nice. But again, there's something really third world about it. Because
it is. And it's more than just like what he wants. I mean, he fired the director of the National Portrait Gallery. Right. The Smithsonian has sort of done this preemptive, if you remember earlier this month, they took out the references to Trump's impeachment in 2019 and 2021. Now it was later restored because sort of people brought that up. But it's like universities, people are kind of like scared. They don't know what to do. And I also feel this is sort of like Pete Hegseth taking down pictures of Jackie Robinson and the Tuskegee Airmen in the Pentagon. We're just not going to talk about this part of our history anymore. I don't know.
And there is too much. You mentioned others taking down, others. I mean, there's a fair amount of preemptive capitulation and accommodation going on outside of the government. It's one thing if you're at a government-funded agency. It's a little trickier to manage that. I appreciate that. But I know of 2 instances of think tanks in the last couple of weeks. Think tanks I respect, people I like, putting together panels, one case selecting a speaker for an annual kind of event, and none of this involves me at all personally, but friends told me about this. And, the discussion was partly, well, we don't want to be at odds with the administration totally. We have people who are critical, and that's great, free speech. We want diverse scholars. We don't want to look like we're just picking fights with them, because not that they're getting money necessarily, but we want to be able to have access and make our case and blah, blah, blah. So for all these kind of good reasons, we're proud of our work. We want them to influence policy. They're not having a speaker who would really be viewed as kind of too critical of Trump. So that's happening a lot more than I think I would have anticipated, honestly.
Yeah.
And maybe more than people realize, because a lot of it is a quiet discussion in a boardroom somewhere, and then they invite someone else. They don't invite someone terrible. They don't invite Pete Hegseth's brother or something to speak, but they don't invite the controversial person. And we saw that with the Naval Academy, right?
Yes, we did.
And at West Point too, I guess, right? Recently, in terms of who could be a guest lecturer there. I think it was a one-year position, and very well qualified person, incidentally, in that case, right? Who just gets bumped.
She was a graduate, retired colonel, who worked in the government in a nonpartisan way, was an independent.
Right.
And
these stories
because she told the truth about the 2020 election, apparently.
Yeah, that's literally it, though. I mean, she's not like she was out, being a full-time campaigner, I don't believe, for Democrats or a partisan or anything like that. And and it happens. And the Secretary of the Army, I mean, that's the thing. All the enablers, it makes me sick. Some of these people have a little bit better backgrounds than Pete Hegseth. I mean, it doesn't take much to have a better one, but they have considerably. I mean, they're like semi-serious people. They were reputable figures. They come in and Trump, Hegseth tells them to do this, and they're going about, they don't fight back. I mean, whatever. The first term, there was so much more resistance, which had a real effect, incidentally, in checking Trump. And this time, they've carefully selected loyalists for all these top positions. The Republican Senate, they have a huge amount to answer for, I think. If Hegseth and Kennedy and one or two others had not been confirmed, I feel like, and then he'd have to take someone else. It wouldn't have been, believe me, people you and I like who would be in these jobs. But there would have been a sense of there are certain limits. There are certain things you kind of shouldn't go beyond. And now that's all gone. I mean, the United States Senate, 50, 51, 52 out of 53 Republicans, not like 70% of them, but 5% of them voted to confirm these obviously unqualified and dangerous people in many cases to these jobs. Very hard to then sustain any internal checks within the administration, because one of the checks in the administration, as you know, having been in and around government, is this will cause trouble for us on the Hill if we do this, so we got to be a little careful. But now nothing causes trouble on the Hill among the Republicans. It's really the danger of that kind of combination. The administration full of loyalists with no guardrails, a Republican Congress that just goes along with everything, a media ecosystem that parrots and publicizes the lies and the disinformation. It's genuinely dangerous.
It is dangerous, and that leads me to this last point: this firing of the Bureau of Labor Statistics head, replacing her with the guy from the Heritage Foundation. 2/3 of Americans view the economy negatively. So my guess is Trump looks at that and says, well, I got to change that view, right? Because this is hurting me. So I'm going to change the view. I'm going to change the messenger. I'm going to change what the data says. So I'm going to put my economist, who's completely unqualified, by the way, his name is E.J. Antoni. And we find out this morning, by the way, that he was in the crowd in the insurrection there on the Hill and on January 6th. But, a loyalist who's going to go in there and falsify the data that's given to the America and the world. I mean, I just think this is alarming.
Totally. And it's very much of a piece, as we've said, with the other loyalists. And this is a particularly traditionally totally nonpartisan, by the book, very kind of nerdy economist place. Very much, the data is sacrosanct. I remember when we were in the White House, you don't get to see it ahead of time. You don't get to butt in at all. It's there. It's very much supposed to be, the credibility of it depends on there being no political involvement. That's now gone. But, it's a good case study also of the way in which you get, the frog in the water problem. I mean, the boiling water, right? I mean, when he fires the woman who's totally competent, who has run the place with total integrity, so far as we know. Then there's a day or two, well, the deputy's taking over. I think he too is a career person, so maybe it's not quite as bad. Trump was being irrational. He was annoyed by the numbers, but then there was a little bit of, Steve Bannon and some people on the far right want this guy from Heritage to be appointed, and he's got nominally a PhD in economics, but he's not a serious person. That won't happen, though. Maybe they'll get some economists we don't like that much, but at least they'll get someone who's like respectable, Well, and they nominate him. Then it turns out he was in the crowd on January 6th. He seems to do these Zooms like we're doing with the Bismarck as the ship behind him, the German ship, which Hitler personally commissioned in 1939, famous because it got destroyed pretty quickly by the British Navy, I guess, in 41, and then they dug it up, right, 20 years ago. There's a lot of publicity. It's a famous ship, so I guess maybe he just likes famous battleships, and he has them on his wall. And the one he chooses to do Zooms in front of is a German one, not an American one, for whatever reason. It's a little unusual.
Bismarck?
It's a little unusual, I would say, but I mean, I don't mean that.
He has the German Bismarck in the background or something.
Have you seen this? Yeah, literally. Yeah, you go look on. Yeah, that's like
that is the German battleship that people.
And it's big. I mean, it's not like a little, like he's got 8 battleships. You know what I mean? It's a big kind of mural.
It was one of the biggest ever built, I think.
No, but I mean, then the mural behind him is big.
Oh,
right?
okay.
It was one of the biggest ever built. It turns out like it wasn't very apparent. I read up on this for 5 minutes. I mean, it didn't work out very well because the British Navy took care of it after 9 months. I did some damage and then they sunk it. But anyway, but no, so the guy's obviously, in addition to not being qualified, sort of a weirdo and whatever. And and this will be a good one. Will he get confirmed by the Republican Senate? I guess a little bit of me thinks, I don't know, maybe this is a bridge too far. There are some actual business types and economist types in the Republican conference who look at this and think, okay, I have to go along with Hegseth. He's a Fox News personality. This guy is a nobody, and I don't have to go along with this. But you know what? They're probably going to go along.
They're probably going to go along. I mean, I feel the same way. And there's a lot of people that look at all of this and I feel like have this idea that, the Senate's not really going to go through with it. This guy is so, whether it's JFK, at first it was Hegseth. And I remember talking to a retired flag officer who told me, when I asked, hey, are you worried about this nomination? This guy is completely unqualified to be Secretary of Defense. And the response was, I don't think he'll get through committee. And if he does, then maybe I'll say something. And I'm like, okay.
And then if I can just interrupt and add, and then he won't get confirmed. And it gets confirmed. Well, he won't do some of these things. I mean, I know he complained about the chairman of the Joint Chiefs and totally unwarranted claim that he was political or unqualified or something. DEI appointment, really disgraceful, extremely. As I understand, you would know more than I. Very well respected throughout the military, Seakeeper, and he won't really fire them. That was just talk. Fires them. No. I mean, the degree to which people just won't come to grips with what is happening is alarming.
It is. Well, I don't want to end completely on a negative note. We always on this show end with the cheers on the Unfiltered show. And the cheers is about something that happened that we'd like to highlight. I'll start with you. Is there anything that you think is happening that's good or something that maybe happened in the last week?
I think the public is more people voted for Trump than should have, in my opinion. But a lot of them didn't quite want this, And I do, on the one hand, they should have known it was coming, to be honest. So I don't want to excuse them. I think Trump said mass deportation. They don't really get to say, oh, I had no idea this might happen. On the other, they didn't really expect it to happen the way it is.
Right.
Same with these appointments. Same with this BLS stuff, if they're a business supporter of Trump and stuff. So I feel like there's a better chance for Democrats to make the case that, look, however you voted in 24, you voted. And you may agree with Trump on issue X or issue Y or issue Z, but you do not want this guy unchecked within the administration, unchecked outside the administration by Congress. It's too dangerous. So I actually think the chances of a pretty good Democratic showing in 2026, with a slight caveat about the redistricting and the putting the thumb on the scale, but leaving the voting stuff. But that's why that's so important. But if that stuff doesn't hit in too badly, I think 2026 could be pretty good for Democrats.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've been talking to a lot of folks who voted for Trump or lean Republican. And what you hear is, we like kind of what he was trying to do. We sort of agree with that. But the way he's doing it is really bad. And here's the other thing I'm hearing. Republicans in Congress don't have the guts to stand up to him to do what's right. These are Republicans saying this. They're saying these guys are afraid of him, and we can't have that in this country. We got to have people that can stand up to him when he does this overreach. So I'm hopeful too. But I want my cheers for this show, though, is going to be completely non-political. I want to bring in something that I think is really cool. Just this week, over the weekend, the Major League Baseball got its first female umpire, a woman by the name of Jen Powell, I think, who has been a longtime umpire, many, many years, 30-some years, was called up to the majors. And she worked first base and I think behind the plate at the Miami Marlins Atlanta Braves doubleheader. And I just think that's great. And so I wanted to do a cheers to her, but also it got me thinking, Bill, like, of the other professional sports in America, have we had female umpires, referees? And do you know this? Like NFL, do you know if the NFL's have female referees?
I don't. I mean, I don't think they have, but I don't.
Yeah. So they actually have the only professional sport that's left that hasn't had a female umpire or referee is hockey. So the NFL has had one, and I knew this because I took the kids up to Canton last summer, and there's some women in the Hall of Fame there. But the NBA has female referees. The Major League Soccer has referees, but the NHL hasn't, and MLB, the baseball, until this past weekend didn't. So I just think that's great, and cheers to her and to Major League Baseball for that. And I really appreciate you coming on the show and hosting this with me today. This is great.
No, I really enjoyed it. Thanks a lot. It's been great seeing you.
Bill Kristol, everybody.